This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Infineon. Hi and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is November 1st, 2023, and I'm here at Infineon headquarters in Silicon Valley to talk about OktoberTech, which is an event that took place here last week, and I've got Adrian Mikowajczuk here with me, and I've got Kim Lee with me again. This is part two of a two-part interview conversation basically we're having about D&D, we decide to call it. Decarbonization and digitalization. These are two big efforts for Infineon. It's been going on for a while. We talked about it with them last year. So in the last episode, we kind of took the temperature, found out where you guys were at, how things had evolved over the year, and kind of some of the problems that are being solved and how it affects your business and your consumers, which are other businesses, and of course, the end consumer, people watching and listening to the show. So this episode, we're going to talk about some of the demos we saw, because that's actually what I'm honestly the most excited about. Getting my hands on things is always. So those of you on Patreon watching the video version are probably going to get quite a treat this time, because you're going to get to see a bunch of things we're going to show. Those listening, we'll try to describe it best we can. But let's start with you, Adrian. What was the one thing? I think we're talking about four things. What was the one thing that really kind of was like, woo?
So I think, we kind of hinted at it last time when we talked about the solar inverter technology and how that's gone forward. And so I figured I'd go a little more in depth than we did last time.
Please do.
Okay. So I think what we kind of talked about is how since about 2008, if you take something that was a solar inverter then and you look at what we're showing through our customers on the floor today, what they've been able to achieve with our devices. So our devices have evolved a lot. We started applying technology like silicon carbide and GaN to our power converter technology.
Those memes on the internet?
Yeah.
Where you need more cowbell? I did one that says, need more GaN. Everything needs more GaN. See, this is how nerdy my audience is. Like, this is the level of, okay.
So you really liked the keynote.
Yes, the GaN is my thing. So carry on with the GaN.
So in the keynote, if you recall, the comment was, we're making history again.
Oh, see, there you go.
That's
good. Awesome.
But going back, this device level technology, especially like on the silicon carbide and the solar inverter, I mean, that's how we got from, or there's a key piece in how we got from this 90 watts per kilogram to 3,000 watts per kilogram and 97% efficiency and 99% efficiency. That was enabled in many ways by silicon carbide. And so that's something we're really proud of. And across the show, we show this again and again with different kinds of devices, here taking a PD controller for your power, for your mobile phone, getting the conversion of that up to 96% in that case, and that was with GaN, getting these other things up and up and up and continuing to drive that.
How much of your work goes into the average PD charger that we use for our devices today? Is Infineon very present in this?
Yeah, I mean, so we'll make, for example, the key element that drives a lot of these architectures is switching of on and off of power. Right.
So switching technology.
Those switches are our GaN switches as well as our diodes and our other devices as well.
And even down to the MOSFETs with low RDS on. I mean, these are the things that enable even as simple as the MOSFET technologies that we have are state of the art, in which they are looking at better. Lower RDS on, better parasitics, I guess, if you will, to have more efficient power conversion through the line.
You know what?
Actually, I was just going to add one thing. It's kind of interesting from your audience perspective. There's the efficiency in the sense of what you pay for at the end of the day.
Right.
How much should I spend on my electrical bill? But like even on things like chargers, there's another aspect here. Sometimes the size of these chargers are not limited by the electronics. They're actually limited by the power. They have to dissipate.
Thermals, yeah.
Yes. And so as you make them more efficient, you have an opportunity to actually shrink them further. So, if you're talking about your travel and you're planning your travel.
And you carry less stuff and it's less weight, and the plane is more efficient because it's less weight on the plane. Do you see now? No, but the point is, Anker is a good friend of the podcast, the company that makes chargers. And And, I use their chargers pretty much exclusively, and it's incredible how much smaller GaN has made their chargers. And, I think that's the other thing. A lot of my audience kind of knows this intuitively, but, you guys are kind of deep in this. And my background being electrical engineering, I get it too. It's like so much of what we do today is switching power. It doesn't really matter what you're looking at, whether it's like an inverter for your car or like PWM dimming for displays. Like a big topic right now in consumer tech is people are becoming more and more sensitive to low light flicker on their displays, and bumping up the PWM on the displays is becoming a selling point. Like people are actually looking at what's your PWM dimming
without increasing the power, because you have
correct. Yeah. And so I think the state of the art is 4 kilohertz right now, and the average good display is 1 kilohertz, and bad displays Apple 200 hertz. So, they'll get there. It's not that Apple makes the display, it's Samsung anyway, but like some companies, this is not necessarily tied to the display technology, but it's interesting because I think that, PWM controllers are a dime a dozen for you guys, right? You probably do 1 million of those for everything from thermostats to whatever. The point I'm making is that not my audience, because I think they know enough, but I think the average person out there has no idea how much switching is going on in their lives.
Oh, I mean, yeah. The perfect example of that is just think back, well, I guess, 15, 20 years ago, and you would get those chargers in the wall, and there were these big, heavy bricks. And they had big transformers.
Yeah, I just call them bricks.
All that has been replaced by switching. And so now, and if you look at power tools, for example, you look at the older power tools. I mean, there were the AC ones, they were kind of big, but then the first ones that came out, those potentially had transformers in them, other kinds of things. And the way they've shrunk down is they've put in more and more and more switching.
Yeah. And we live in a world that's fully switched. I love it. So Kim, tell us a little more about this other product. I think that's really interesting. We talked briefly about the benefits for solar inverters of shrinking size and more efficiency, right? Like practical applications that can't prevent is what we talked about. But you have this one thing here with the stethoscope that's really fascinating to me. Because, my background's DSP, so a lot of it is audio processing. And audio processing today is heavily improved by AI. In fact, this recording right now that you're all listening to, my audience is here, is going to go through AI processing to remove noise and other imperfections. And you won't hear the difference. It'll sound way cleaner to you. And I think that combined with better hardware, like MEMS mics, and that are much more sensitive, have essentially no moving parts, they're solid state, I think are a revolution in audio. And audio, it's pretty broad. Like, I'm including piezo sensors in there. I'm including, low frequency acoustic stuff. So tell us a little bit of what Infineon's doing in that field and how that translates into this really cool stethoscope. Do you want to show it real quick here?
Sure. So MEMS microphone technologies that we have our own MEMS capabilities, and we're trying to always get to our state-of-the-art specifications. The big important one for microphones is SNR, being able to
signal to noise ratio,
to be able to do that. Also, AOP, acoustic overload point, being able to compromise. It's like a fighting parameter where every time you try to increase the SNR, your AOP has to suffer. But we're trying to find a happy medium that makes it work. We're breaking boundaries by exceeding 70, 75, even 80 dB SNR.
Wow.
Which is
it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, right now what you have on your laptops, for example, is in the low 60s, if not high 50s.
Yeah.
Right. So mobile phones are getting into the mid to low 60s to now maybe in the high 60s with the better phones. But we're looking at next generation being into 70 plus 80 dB SNR microphones. And basically that one has a bunch of our electronics, from our PSOC microcontrollers to a BLE chip that we have in there enabling
Bluetooth,
this.
Yeah.
So
and you even have you can actually connect a cable there.
Yeah, an actual cable where the doctors, So, and it's a USB charger as well, so power delivery with the USB.
Like this?
Yeah, just basically put it on the chest and then demonstrate it. It listens to your heartbeat and
very, very cool. And it's got some buttons on it. And it's just like...
Yeah, but if you look at our IoT, right, as a whole, I mean, this is where, all these things, Infineon just keeps driving forward, right? Like I said, from Bluetooth to Wi-Fi to our microcontrollers to our sensors. I mean, this is a use case where multiple of these things are needed, but I mean, It's everywhere, right?
And
As you said, it's not just.
In other senses, where we're very focused on not just in the consumer and smart home space, but automotive space. I mean, we have 60 gigahertz RF sensors in automotive sensing.
Before we touch on that, I want to kind of finish on the mics, just because we talked about this on the last show a little bit. But microphones that are used in external application in vehicles. In the same way as electric cars now have an external speaker that plays a nice little angel sound when you're moving below a certain speed so that, pedestrians can hear an electric car, which is so quiet. We now have microphones that you've developed that can be mounted externally, which is an incredible challenge because the acoustic environment is insane, and the environment.
It's the environment that's insane, yeah.
Right. So I'm actually interested in that. It's also funny because I made fun of Apple for the PWM displays earlier, the dimming, but they have the best microphones in the industry on all their devices. I don't know what they're using, but it's the best. I can actually use this laptop's microphone if this better Shure microphone was defective, and probably between that and AI, get a really good recording today here. And, that was not possible just even 2 or 3 years ago, which, between the AI processing and the better microphones. So I'm particularly excited about, what you guys are doing in automotive, because we always think of visual sensing, but when you're driving, a human driver, you're constantly listening to stuff. Yeah, you might be listening to your tunes, but you have the ability to detect that siren through your music, up to a certain level anyway. And that's something that inherently you do as a human. Yeah. But because you have incredibly good sensors. So, you can add all the processing you want to a modern microphone. It's much harder if the microphone isn't good enough to start with.
Well, I think...
And it's also, it has to be environmentally waterproof and so forth. If you put the microphones outside, it's exposed to harsh environments, meaning that you have to be able to have the same SNR level in an outside environment that's shielded with whatever technology that's able to keep it waterproof. And
right, you immediately decrease the performance of your microphone simply by the environmental protection you apply, and it's just becomes a big mess.
I was going to say, this is one of those things that one thinks of, like microprocessors is always moving and getting better and those kinds of things, but as Kim mentioned, microphone technology by itself is continuously pushing new bounds and evolving and getting better and better and better. And these things are all trade-offs, exactly like you said. You put some sort of environmental block in there, and as you just said, oh, geez, my signal noise got worse, right? And so now I've got to compensate for that some other way, somewhere in the MEM structure, do something else, somewhere in the noise cancellation structure. And I'm very amazed by just how much over the years the microphones, as you mentioned, just keep getting better and better, while the requirements keep getting harder and harder and harder. Yeah, it's very cool.
So sensors obviously a big part of what you just mentioned the 60 gigahertz radar, and that is, I saw the demo at CES. It was really cool. It's being used in today's cars. I believe Volvo might not be using a sensor, but I know they are, like for practical example. You are having a sensor in the back of the car or I think it's generally in the front, looking at the back, that sees if somebody is left behind. If you've left a child in your seat, it can detect that using the 60 gigahertz radar. Right?
Yeah, it can be mounted either in the cabin, either front or back, but able to look in the back cabin to make sure that it's able to detect respiratory rate. It's detecting presence. So if you have, let's say, a big object like a dummy, let's say a mannequin, for very simply put, it would show up on a normal pressure sensor on a car seat or whatever. Yeah. But we don't care about it. It's not breathing. We don't care about it as much, right? So it's a more intelligent sensor. And this is what we're doing is with part of that whole digitalization concept, we are making electronics more intelligent, sensors more capable, and making sensors intelligent by adding those capabilities and finding these use cases that people gravitate towards, like safety, automotive safety, better, smarter homes, smarter buildings, and that type of thing. Where these are just enabled by a lot of cool electronics as well as cool processing that goes along.
Let me add to that, because, like, for example, the radar for presence detection, it's one of the demos we had, but I think it's not just a different way of doing it. It's actually a fundamentally improved way potentially of doing it, in the sense that if you think about it, if you just did a pressure sensor in your seat, right, there's a couple of things you've got to do. I mean, we already mentioned that it's not going to pick up breathing, but even aside from that, by putting a pressure sensor in your seat, somehow you've got to wire it up So now you've got 4 different or 5 different, or how many seats you've got, different pressure sensors you got to run the wires, you got to get all that data back to a central hub. Here we're moving that to a single sensor that's then monitoring the cabin.
Which gives flexibility to the manufacturer for placement, which, lets them optimize the cabin for soundproofing, for acoustics, for music, for comfort, for materials. I mean, just to list the benefits to the end consumer, to you guys listening, is, just a much nicer interior to your car that still gives you the functionality you want, and it weighs less. So since we're talking about decarbonization and digitalization, we're digitalizing so we can decarbonize. I'm just particularly excited about radar stuff because at those gigahertz frequencies, you as you said, you can detect breathing, you can detect heart rate possibly. And, that becomes, it's kind of a little spooky in a way, right? Because it's almost like a camera that can see through things. But it becomes a sensor that eventually, by just changing some of the software, you can reuse for new applications. Right now, you can detect, humans and pets, say, right? Now, modern cars like EVs, especially, you can have like the pet mode where the car can stay running and the AC can be on. So it's not as big of an issue. But obviously, there might be other applications in the future where we have these sensors in the car and we're like, oh, hey, what if we used it for the alarm system in some clever way, right? Like, we have cameras, but maybe, they don't work so well in low light. So maybe we can have a thing where with processing the radar data, we actually can realize that a door just got open or a window just got broken or something. You know what I'm saying?
Actually, a use case came up where, like pickup trucks, where people like in the construction industry to have valuable tools, valuable equipment in their truck beds, they want to be able to monitor safety as well. So an application came up where, obviously a camera's there, they'll see, a nice 4K view of the truck bed, but that draws a lot of power.
Right.
And consumes a lot of battery life. So what can be done to say, okay, I see an intruder. I don't, obviously see the details of the intruder, but I see a presence that's there that could be concerning. Now I'm going to go turn on the camera.
Now turn on the camera.
And now it's going to see, okay, am I seeing something that's threatening or not?
No. For sure. But of course, the future construction workers and contractors will have all their tools in the frunk, as we all know, because of electric cars, right? No, but it's a good point. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. It's like you're developing this technology and you end up with like all these ancillary uses that weren't originally intended.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe I add to that because radar is an interesting one because it is a bit of a challenge to understand radar. It's not the way we normally think of the world, and these polar coordinates and these kinds of things. But I think the other thing that was cool that we launched last week actually was this sensing as a service too. So now we've started thinking about, and going back to your discussion about software, how do we enable customers to kind of get there quickly and efficiently without having to become experts in that single sensor down to the nitty gritty, right? Yeah. And so that's an initiative we're very excited about.
Yeah, I mean, RF data, RF itself is to some it's black magic, right? But not really. But it is very complex to implement and use, integrate. So we have to provide a solution that's simple enough for any consumer product manufacturer that is gravitating towards having a more intelligent sensor to enable their electronics, whatever it be, whether it's lighting or whatever it is, to use it. So we have to provide that solution from the sensor itself, enabling from an intelligence standpoint by having the right algorithms, the right software, and it basically as a reference design so that they can copy and paste that design into their product and accelerate their R&D, their design, and go to market faster.
Well, on that note, I think we should wrap up. Actually, this is a good way to segue, actually, because we talked about software and how it's so critical on top of the hardware, but also how the evolution of the hardware is so critical in the last segment. So, if you get a chance to listen to last week's episode, the first 15 minutes or so are kind of a more global view of what Infineon's doing in decarbonization and digitalization. And I'm glad you tuned in for this week's show. Thanks, folks, for being here and telling us about these great demos. I got to experience them, and I really enjoyed it. So thanks so much again.
Cool. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
And, folks, I'm back with Sean. Hi, Sean. How are you?
Oh, really excited to get to talk with you today, Miriam. I appreciate the invitation to join you.
Absolutely. So you write for RCR Wireless. Sean Kinney, everyone. So listen, it's kind of been an interesting couple of weeks in the compute world, right? Like Apple, I felt like was maybe trolling Qualcomm when they announced their Scary Fast event while we were in Hawaii together. And I don't think they were. It's not their style. I think they might have opportunistically waited for the keynote to end at Qualcomm to make the announcement. But people who think that they rushed to make that video that they broadcast on Monday night are nuts. Like that was prepared weeks ahead, right?
Absolutely. Apple doesn't rush anything, to put out there that, oh, they've thrown together this event and what the commercial availability and pre-order setups for a brand new product. Like, that's not exactly right. I think your comment about opportunistically timing the announcement, I think that's probably exactly right.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they had it in their back pocket. And then when they found out the summit was happening, they instead of doing their maybe 8 days of heads up to the media, they did like, oh, well, 6 days we'll have to do this time kind of thing, right? So M3s. So I'm a big Mac user. I have a bunch of Silicon Macs. I'm actually recording on my old Core i5 iMac right now. That thing is so ready to retire. But the thing that I was hoping would happen based on the rumors was like a 27 or 30 inch iMac. We didn't get that. And I think I'm about to bite the bullet, Sean. I'm about to just go to Portland, Oregon, where I can buy things tax-free on my way between my many drives up and down the West Coast and buy myself a purple iMac. God damn it.
I love an iMac, and I was so hopeful for a 27-inch version. I use the Apple Studio display right now, and as much as I like the specs on that iMac, I cannot stand that it would be close, but not the same size as my primary display. That just
I can't go back to anything smaller than this. Like it's not like I can go up maybe a bit, like 30, but I don't think I can go down to 24. But I might just have to because this thing is such a dog, like I pull out my MacBook Air all the time to work at home. And in the old days, you could turn these iMacs into a display that had display target mode. And that's gone now. And it was firmware disabled. That's the worst part. You can't go back to an old OS version with it and just make that happen. The only way you can use this beautiful 5K panel that I have in this iMac is to gut it and put like a little LCD control board in there with an HDMI input. There are a dime a dozen on eBay and on Amazon. You can buy these retrofit kits, but that feels so kind of wrong to me. Like, why not have this target display mode?
That's antithetical to Apple design for me. And I mean, I'll take it one step further. Like my iPhones, I don't put cases on them because all of the time and effort that went into designing that phone, right? I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to ruin it. But I watched my mother do her taxes on an iPad Pro with a keyboard attachment. It was terrible to watch. So I think in terms of this iMac, I am going to buy one. Not for me, though.
Yeah, I might do this. I might try it out. I might just go, let's live with it and see how it is. And maybe this, performance on the M3 will get me, right? So let's talk about that, right? So it's been hard to kind of understand, other than reading, people's analyses after the fact that are kind of more into the chip stuff, what the performance improvement really is versus like an M1 and especially an M2 chip. Now, of course, there's also the M3 Pro and Max chips. And but I'm more interested in the M3 because I think it's the big disruptor here, right? So what is your take? Like, what would you tell the average person that walks up to you and say, hey, you work in tech journalism, those M3 iMacs or the new M3 MacBook Pro, I want to buy one. And what kind of speed improvement can I reasonably see? I bought an original M1,
See, I think you hit it right there. And it was evident in Apple's presentation, the comparison of M3 performance versus M1 performance. That's who they're targeting for the upgrade. And just to, personalize it, I've got a MacBook Pro that's an M1 and it has the touch bar, which I love. Maybe we can talk about that separately. I'm probably going to upgrade this machine to an M3. I have a MacBook Air that's an M2. And I'm not going to break my upgrade cycle for an M2 to M3. I don't see the pressing need. That said, I'm kind of full of shit. So if I can get a decent resale price for my M2 machine, probably going to buy that M3. But in theory, and devoid of any externalities, I would not upgrade my M2 right now.
But you would consider upgrading potentially a really early M1. You've had an M1 since 2020. Like you bought the original MacBook Air, for example, and you want a little more, but you're not really ready to go like full on Pro. You want a better display, for example. Maybe look at the MacBook Pro base M3, right? Question though, I think it's not really a question. It's more a statement, really. Like if you are an Intel right now and you're thinking of upgrading either the iMac or a MacBook Pro or even a MacBook Air at this point, this is it, right? Like you're good. Like you go for it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is a super performant silicon option that they've put out. It is just fully software optimized for the hardware. I think it's going to be a great experience. And I think if you're coming off of an Intel device, you're going to notice it. It's going to be a big leap in terms of how it feels when you use it, for sure.
Can we have a little rant for a second about the fact that they didn't upgrade the keyboard and mouse and trackpad to USB Type-C and it's still Lightning? I'm vexed by that. And I know Tim Cook is an operational wizard. He's trying to maximize, the flow here. And he's probably got stock of that stuff he's trying to get rid of, right? Or the molds and the manufacturing line are still good enough in terms of quality that he wants to wear it out a bit more and has more manufactured. But I am so annoyed with that. Like, it just feels so wrong right now.
I mean, standardization is how we get to scale, and I love to see it. And I'm glad that they're eventually going to get everything on that USB-C. But yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I've got a perfectly good Magic Mouse here with a Lightning port that I'm absolutely going to replace when there's
it's
a USB-C.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
Look, I have to say, though, as much as the charging port on the bottom is ridiculous, right? I still feel like this is, for me, a good mouse. A lot of people don't like the ergonomics, but I love the fact that it has essentially a trackpad for scrolling. I have not used another mouse, even from big manufacturers like Logitech, where I feel as comfortable sideways scrolling, like left to right, which I do a lot in audio and in video editing. Now a lot of people say just get a trackpad, and I have a Magic trackpad as well. But I feel like at the desktop, I'm happier with a mouse. On a laptop, I'm totally comfortable with the trackpad all the time. The thing about this mouse, though, compared to the previous one that was 2 AA's, right? Even though it charges in the most ridiculous way, and I literally have another mouse that I keep charged that I swap. I have 2 mice. I have 2 Magic mice. In fact, the other one is the AA version, because that way, like those AA's, I turn it off because it's an actual off switch, and they just last forever. I just think battery life is not bad on this rechargeable. Like, it lasts months. So if they could just put the port at the bottom on the side somehow, like bottom side, like hidden under this lip right here, like just hide it down there, and we can still use the mouse. Or probably you'd want to be it at the top so you could use the mouse. But anyway, I digress. I had to rant about that. Sorry.
No, I understand. I think that's a very valid feedback, and maybe the design team is listening. But I imagine, based on what I've seen on Twitter, that they're well aware of the complaints in this department.
I think so too, and they knew it was coming. They're just like, screw it, we're just going to finish this run. Okay, so we talked about the iMac. I wanted a bigger one, but I really have no complaints about anything else on it. Like anybody who else is complaining, I'd see what the issue would be. Like, yeah, you want more ports built in, but it's got the gigabit Ethernet on the power adapter. I actually think that's pretty brilliant. The majority of people are going to be on Wi-Fi, and you're not going to plug anything down there. And if you have the base model, you don't get that anyway. So whatever. The thing that is vexing to me, since we're still on just M3 right now, is with the MacBook Pro M3, the base model has one less port. That's okay. I get it too, because it's a number of whatever USB-C Thunderbolt ports it can support at the chip level. But 8 gigs of RAM. Like, okay, before you go answer this, I want to preamble this. I'm having this kind of active conversation on Threads right now with someone who's arguing with me that 8 gigs is not enough. And I'm like, look, 8 gigs is not enough on an Intel Mac. 8 gigs is not enough on a Apple Silicon Mac if you are a heavy user. But 90% of the people out there really don't need more than 8 gigs of RAM. But this is a Pro model. That's why I'm making the argument. Like, I think for the MacBook Air, 8 gigs is fine. I think potentially for the iMac, 8 gigs is fine, but 16 gigs should be the Pro. At 1600, it should be.
I was struck by the range because I think you can get a fully spec'd out M3 Max Pro.
I looked it.
You got it. 128.
You can get 128 gigs and
that's
8 terabytes.
A lot. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. That's maybe too much. I don't really know what I'd be doing with that, but I mean, you would know it when you see it. But yeah, I mean, 8 for Apple's market, 8 is probably right. And you maybe see a little bit of it in the price point, but like, yeah, they could stand to make 16 kind of the floor, I think, and everybody would be happy. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
For $1,600 and Pro model, I feel like they should have kind of done that. Probably say $1,649. Just throw us a bone. This is a Pro model. Like, my argument, or I don't want to say it's an argument, but the conversation on Threads we're having right now is I'm saying, no, you don't need more than 8 gigs. Those people are saying 8 gigs is unacceptable. You've never used an Intel Mac versus a Silicon Mac, an Apple Silicon.
Statistically, no people will have an issue with this.
I know.
The people that would run up against that amount of RAM are very few and far between. But hey, I'm curious, have you gotten a shipment date for your...
So I never bought it, like a $7,000. Like I configured it to see where it would go, right? No, I don't have a shipment date. Some of the folks I know that are friends of ours, journalists, have ordered pretty high-end models, like the YouTube creators. And they're switching from M1 MacBook Pros to the M3. And a lot of them have only gone for the Max. A lot of them have only gone for the Pro, not the Max, first of all. And a lot of them have kind of gone for like, I think 36 gigs, whatever that middle tier is of RAM, and then lots of storage because they need it for their videos. But and it seems to be expensive, but not crazy. The maxed out version is basically about $7,000. And that's 128 gigs of RAM, M3 Max, and 8 terabytes. Oh my God. That's actually, honestly, not that much money. Like, when you think about how much you could spec an MacBook Pro a few years back, I think you could go up to $9,000 at one point on these Core i9 Macs back in the day. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
So...
yeah, I think the people that are buying that machine, I know someone who bought the fully spec'd out and he does not have a shipment date yet, but I mean, for him, that's a business expense and a very easily justifiable business expense. That's probably who that's for. Hey, but wait a minute, Touch Bar. I mean, we all knew that this was coming, but I mean, I give way more PowerPoint presentations than I'd care to do and that I'd care to admit. And if you take away all the other Touch Bar functionality, slide advancement is so nice on a Touch Bar. And
I've never used it for slide advancement, so I don't know. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, it's you don't have to have a peripheral. If you're recording the presentation, you don't have to see that mouse movement lingering over the advance button. If you're trying to advance from your keyboard, you don't have to have that moment of panic where you press forward and nothing happens, because you've got a nice little thumbnail image of, about 7 slides across the Touch Bar, and you can just go from one to the other, and it doesn't show up on your camera, and you don't have to mess with your mouse, and you don't have to touch your keyboard. It's super helpful.
Wow, that sounds pretty awesome. I will be frank with you. I'm glad the Touch Bar is finally dead. I come from old school development, game development, programming, and to me, the function row is literally something I use not for volume and brightness. I actually do that, but I have it set to use function key for that. Function, volume, function on all my Macs and all my PCs and all my Linux machines. Because for me, when I hit F5, it's compile, okay? Like, I cannot, and it cannot be a virtual key. It's such a physical experience. And that's where I'm stuck. I think the Touch Bar was a good idea, but they made a bunch of strategic mistakes. The first one was not having the escape key on the initial Touch Bar. Like, the escape key is not like a developer key. This is a key you touch a lot. You're in full screen mode on YouTube, escape comes back. Like things, you don't want that to be a virtual key. The other ones could be argued, especially the way Apple's been going, very more like iPad, iPhone-like with the experience on the Mac. But I think they've taken a step back on that too, right? The pros are now thicker. They are. I think that they were trying to introduce something new. But then when they got the feedback it wasn't working, they kind of stuck with it in this very Apple job-esque way. And I think now they're back to listening to their customers, right? And I think that's why I'm very happy they've gotten rid of it. What I think they need to do is, in the same way as continuity lets you can seamlessly use, your iPhone or whatever device, like in the case of the camera, continuity is really amazing. But why not have your Apple Watch or even your phone, any phone, maybe have a continuity feature with Android so that you can do the slide presentations, have that thumbnail just, of course you still have to hold something in your hand, but like, I'm just thinking like there's possibly maybe, who is that company that does the little accessories that have little programmable iconic buttons? Like, you could have one of the, like a strip bar like that too, that you can just add as an add-on to your computer. I think there's a use for that kind of concept, or like a micro display, but I think replacing the function key bar with it was the wrong thing to do. Putting on top would have been the right thing to do, in my opinion.
It was a bold experiment that we can officially bid goodbye to.
Yeah, but
it's over.
You're sad. You loved it.
Well, this machine's still in good shape, and for running PowerPoint advancement, I can keep it around for probably 18 more months.
So is this the M1 13-inch Pro you got then?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so look, I think if you love the touch bar, go buy yourself an M2 13-inch Pro from Amazon on sale right now. It's a great machine. There's no doubt about it. My only gripe with it was the touch bar. But does it have the better keyboard? They've fixed the keyboard on it, right? It's got the new updated Magic keys or whatever. Like, it doesn't have the butterfly anymore, right? They fixed it.
Yeah, yes. Okay. That is repaired on this one. I think that was
because that was another episode of Apple Madness. And the thermals, right? Like, making machines that thin with Intel chips in them was a bad idea back in the day. So I love that now they have the much more efficient and powerful Apple Silicon on thicker machines that can even absorb that heat better and manage it better with fans and whatever. I think it's fascinating how Apple's really been listening, except for the freaking 27-inch iMac.
Give them another year. Maybe we'll see.
We'll find out. So yeah, that's one thing that stood out for me, the base RAM on that M3. So then the M3 Max and the M3 Pro. What's your take? Do you want to talk about what's your impression as to where these kind of fit in? If you had to draw a graph of like performance 0 to 100, right? Where 100 is like, I don't know, the fastest M chip, and 0 like maybe the M1 base, right? Like the one the slightly reduced performance one that only has lesser GPUs, the one they put on the original base MacBook Air. Where do you place, all these chips? Because like I need to see that graph, because I'm not able to picture where the M2 Max and M2 Pro and M2 Ultra fit in this, and the M1 Pro and M1 Max and M1 Ultra.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of emphasis on the GPU enhancements, right? And now kind of support for dual screen, which, like, why was that not already in there? But that's a whole other conversation. But like you said, it's kind of difficult for comparison purposes until get them in hand and get to actually
benchmarks or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, based on what Apple presented, like, just back to my initial comment about, like, I think that the prime switchers are going to be M1 people. But yeah, the Pro and the Max that's quite a chip.
I mean, there's no Ultra, right? Which is kind of like, I mean, maybe they're reserving that for the Pro Tower, right? Because it's going to be even crazier. But some people have speculated that the M3 Max might outperform the M2 Ultra that's in the Mac Pro Tower right now.
I have seen that suggestion on Twitter a number of times since the Apple event, and it'll be interesting to quantify that when it's possible.
The one thing that I got excited about was, kind of wrapping up this whole Apple stuff, is kind of the space black. Like, obviously, some people have had hands-on, limited amount of time with them, but it do seem to hide fingerprints pretty well, which is a big claim. But, I love that they, of course, only made that available on the Pro and the Max model.
Oh, of course.
It's so Apple.
Yes, and it looks great. I mean, no notes. That's exactly what that machine.
I want it so bad,
like.
but there's no way
Absolutely.
I'm spending that kind of money. I don't need it. It's like, I don't know if it's been the same with you as we've both been in this business for decades, but it's like, do you feel that like I'm looking at things every time I have that craving, I'm like, oh yeah. And I'm realizing, in a year, there'll be something better. Like, why would I spend money on this? I don't need it right now, right? It's gotten to a point where there was a time in history of tech when I was like, I need this. And I knew I needed this. Like when the original Apple Silicon MacBook Air came out, I bought it instantly, right? Because I knew, but like this, like it's really hard for me to go to a lot of people are like, why don't you have a MacBook Pro? You're kind of pretty heavy duty. I'm like, I don't need it. The reality is I just don't need it.
I have 2 more Macs than I need because I need 1 and I have 3 and I can't, I'm with you. I can't justify the price to get a space black one, but I sure want one.
Hot. Any other final thoughts before we start talking about where the M3 fits in with the announcement from Qualcomm last week?
Oh boy, I mean, yeah, I guess as a lead-in comment, just between the work Apple has done and what Qualcomm appears to do, it seems like we are entering a renaissance for ARM-based PCs and Macs. It's just all quite exciting, isn't it?
Oh my God, I am so happy. The ARM revolution is happening. It's happening on the server side too, in data centers. And we're now seeing, on-device AI really being a priority, like whether it's the M3 Apple Silicon, we're seeing that there. Although Apple is not really talking about it as much, there's already rumors of people with devices that have been able to run some large language models very effectively on this new chip. So on-device AI, generative AI. So obviously, this ARM revolution, is got me super excited, and it's continuing. And as I said, I've got wishful thinking for a 12-inch MacBook Retina again, but I don't think it's going to happen. But if anybody at Apple's listening, the road warrior amongst us would really love something like that. Just add another USB port on the other side, maybe, and with 2 ports is fine. Put 5G in there since your chips could do 5G, or add a Qualcomm modem maybe since you're doing that with iPhones right now. Anyway, I don't want to burn ourselves. Let's talk about X Elite versus M3, or rather how it fits in, because while there is this revolution, right, Apple's able to do it because of this beautiful vertical integration they have, where it's easy for them in a way. Like, I don't want to make it sound trivial. Like when I run an emulated Intel app on my Mac and it's seamless and runs faster than on my Intel Macs, it's not trivial. And I recognize that, and I'm amazed with that. But we need that from Microsoft. We need that from HP, from Dell, from the partners. They're all on the slide, but are they going to deliver? That's my big question. Like this ARM revolution is nice, but if not everybody's on board, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, the Snapdragon X Elite, that was a really, really interesting announcement. You and I were both on hand for it. In terms of where it fits in with Apple's announcement, does it really? Are there a lot of people that are going to make the jump? Or I think
we're going to look at performance as somewhere around M1 to M2, possibly closer to M2, which is great. Mm-hmm. But the question is that only is going to happen when Microsoft optimizes Windows, has a proper emulator in there that runs the legacy apps, because that's, B2B wants that. Like that's a thing for the industry out there, for the enterprise. And then finally, we need And this is the problem. I'm seeing this parallel here between the EV car industry, the legacy car makers and EVs, and the HPs and Dells and Asuses of the world and the Lenovo's and the Intel relationship. They are so intertwined and so cautious about pulling away from that partnership because it's their bread and butter. It's like gasoline cars for Ford and GM. Like, I am absolutely certain that Ford is 100% on board with EVs. They've shown that they can do it. They are one of the best at it in North America right now. But they are pulling back right now because they're looking at the economics and going, we're selling more gas cars, and even though the prices of gas are high, blah blah blah. Like, why? This is our bread and butter. And I'm like, this is not the solution. Like, you need one of the big car makers need to jump in and say, we're going full electric. It's happening.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting
I don't
parallel.
see that happening, but I think like if HP or Dell I think Lenovo would be in a great position to do it because they can get subsidies potentially from the Chinese government to do it.
Well, and they have such a huge channel relationship with large enterprises that don't buy, thousands of machines. They buy tens of thousands of machines in one go. And that's enough in some cases to sort of justify. But I guess back to your point around, Microsoft or Windows on ARM or however you'd like to refer to all that. There was some commentary down in Hawaii, but there was some maybe more interesting commentary yesterday on Qualcomm's quarterly call. And Cristiano characterized Qualcomm as a new player in the PC space, which you think, well, that's an interesting thing to say, given that you've had 3 generations of compute platforms prior to.
Does it mean
X
you weren't
Elite.
taking it seriously before?
I think it means here's how I'm choosing to interpret it is that he sees the ecosystem as there. I mean, they have that longstanding relationship with Microsoft. There is that sort of link into the ISV community. There are those optimizations around the experience that you'll see, the emulation 32 versus 64 notwithstanding, but I take that as a pretty confident signal to the market, to the investor market, that they're really ready to play, and they're ready to play big time in PC, which, if we go back to Maui, it's a very performant chipset.
If I wouldn't say it's not a first try, but it is because of the Nubia team that they acquired, right? So I think that I'm impressed, but I will not really truly rest until I get a machine from Lenovo, I fire it up, and it just works like my Mac, right? Like it feels like I'm not sacrificing anything because I have a beautiful Microsoft Surface Pro X here. I just updated the software on it because I hadn't used it in a year or two, and I was like, oh, hey, it's the original. It's not the newer one. But I love the form factor, and I was like, oh, let's fire it up again. And it's so janky. Like, I want to love it because I'm ultra mobile and because I'm a believer in ARM, but man, like we cannot have that experience.
Yeah, I was playing with a Galaxy Book 2 the other day that I hadn't turned on in a year, and I got it all updated, and it took a day to update that thing. Didn't solve any of my underlying complaints about the device. And I mean, I don't know, so many thoughts about X Elite. You mentioned the Nuvia team. We're so used to these architectural diagrams of CPUs that really drive home the point that, okay, you have a big little configuration, or you have a performance core and an efficiency core configuration. And with Qualcomm and the X Elite, that wasn't really the case. And I guess I would shout out an interview that Ian Cuttress did with Gerard Williams.
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I'm super keen on watching that. Yeah. I'll put a link in the note, guys. Yeah.
Really, really interesting. And I mean, he kind of makes the point that his focus is strictly on efficiency of the core, and that high performance flows from that efficiency focus. And he said that there is no distinction. None of them are performance cores. None of them are efficiency cores. They're all the same core. It's like,
this is really interesting. Like, I'm going to do a little tangent here because I'm an engineer, right? My background's electrical engineering. Now, I'm not in any way going to claim that I understand and know anything about modern chip design, but I know essentially enough about electrical engineering to know one thing. And I'm really curious what we're going to see from MediaTek next week or the week after, whenever the summit is coming up. I'm going to that. You know, I think this big little efficiency, you know, performance, I think that's not the solution. That's like having, the analogy I can make is, imagine you have one of those lamps that has, you know, 3 settings, right? Like you turn it on, it's dim. The medium setting is a little brighter. There's a third setting, it's a little brighter, and you turn it off again. You know, this is done with resistors, right? It's old school. There are some LED bulbs today that detect the difference in voltage from the drop-down resistor and adjust the brightness level to match instead of flickering and doing stuff, right? Because it's like there's tons of old lamps that have that feature versus a modern dimmer, you know, that pulse width modulates, just like the backlight on your displays on a LCD or the OLED dimming that happens on a phone. That's pulse width modulation, and it's a technique that's been around forever. The reason it's efficient is because you're literally turning on maximum brightness very briefly with a pause in between the spikes, and it averages out to the brightness you want, but it is much more efficient. You're not heating up these resistors. You're just actually using power when you need it. Now, hear me out. This is an analogy I'm making for the audience because I think where we're going, and we started seeing that with the dynamic caching on M3, where we're going is dynamic PWM on performance or big cores. We're going to a place where, like in 5G, IoT is using 5G not because they have to send a lot of data, but because in a single burst of data, they can send the entire payload of data very efficiently with microscopic amperage use on the battery or the power supply of this temperature sensor out in a cornfield somewhere, or moisture sensor. You know what I'm saying? You follow that stuff.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, you just I think, you know, IoT has always struggled with fragmentation, and 5G was meant to be sort of the, you know, grand unifying theory, and it hasn't happened yet, but it's slowly happening. A lot of interesting stuff going on with RedCap. That's exactly to your point, just absolute, what is the most efficiency I can get for the performance that I need, and how can I dynamically control that? And just again, haven't gone hands-on. We did a little bit of benchmarking in Hawaii, but so far looks really compelling.
It looks good. But I'm wondering if the question we're going to ask, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what MediaTek does here. And maybe they'll do something like it. Who knows? The question to ask is, if you have an efficiency or a little core and you fire it up, you know, for a task, is it less efficient than using a big or, you know, performance core and bursting it, like pulse width modulating it, essentially? That is the question we need to answer. And my gut feeling as an engineer is that we didn't quite have the scheduling tools to schedule the instructions and data flow in the chips to make that work. And now we do. And that might be part of what the trick that Nuvia has that makes this X Elite possible. And it's possible that Apple is there already too. And you know, that we're seeing still some efficiency or little cores in their design because it's kind of still there from, you know, they started a while back. But I have a gut feeling that we're going to see more of this clever bursting of high performance cores on these machines.
Yeah, well, I mean, to the MediaTek piece, we'll find out. I'll be down there in Dana Point or wherever it is in Orange County that summit's being hosted. But just, you know, you mentioned, you know, what we see with Apple now, and I would point out that the visionary behind Snapdragon X Elite, former Apple chip architect, and before that, an ARM distinguished fellow. So I kind of feel like, to your point of maybe this is where we're going, of a kind of a blurred line between what does what. It's about, you know, it's about a heterogeneity, like across the different cores, and that kind of ties into Qualcomm's sort of value statement that cuts across their product lines, which is just, we do low power connected processing very, very well.
Yeah. So we'll see what goes, but I am very gung-ho. I think there's still a lot of runway for ARM. And, Intel needs to get their, crap together and give us an ARM chip if they want to stay relevant. I know that's heresy in their world, but they need to freaking get off this religious high horse of theirs with x86. There's no reason two of them can't coexist. Why continue making x86? It's just like the electric car makers. Make hybrids. Like, just also make good battery EVs. Some people still need hybrids, okay? It's cool. It's fine. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not personally, as a car enthusiast, a big fan of hybrids, but they're freaking efficient and they've gotten really okay enough to drive that it's not a horrible experience anymore. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at.
Anything else on Snapdragon X Elite? I think we referenced that Qualcomm has had these 3 iterations of the compute platform, and they all had the built-in connectivity piece, the built-in modem RF system, and that was really when 5G was front and center on the messaging. With X Elite, that's optional for the OEMs, whether they include an X65 or not. I'll be curious to see what happens in the market, but I imagine most of them will opt not to.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm really excited to see what happens in 6 months when X Elite comes out with devices. But more important, I'm sure we're going to see that around Computex. But I think that I'm also worried that they're at that point, they're going to be perceived as behind again because M3 will, M3 is shipping this week or next week or whatever. Like, it's coming now. Let's switch to some phones and things related to this. Obviously, Qualcomm announced the 8 Gen 3 last week, the mobile chip. And, I did a podcast in the pool in Hawaii with a bunch of folks last week. It was really fun. First time we did a poolside podcast, it went super well. I used some AI audio cleaning tools. I didn't have to do much cleaning. I'm good enough at setting up a good recording in the first place. But being able to just really focus on the 4 people there and myself rather than the other voices behind. AI is amazing at that, and it did a good job with it. I use a tool called Ophonic, Phonic, and it's for pros. It's not a simple tool to use, but it's really incredible. It's online. It's in the cloud. Check it out. It's not something that lets you fully edit audio, all the features of an audio editor. It's specifically, you want to clean up audio, upload a file, play with all the knobs and sliders, and see what AI can do, and you get a result. And then if you want to, you can process it, and you have something like 2 free hours a month, and then you can subscribe to get more time. They're not sponsoring me, but they have been instrumental. There's a lot of podcasts you've listened to on my show in the last 3 months where I've used this tool to rescue recordings and, generally speaking, to enhance the audio of my work. So AI for the win, okay? So Xiaomi 14 Pro was announced at the summit last week in Hawaii, but we now have hands-on Ben Sin, the awesome Ben Sin of XDA, who also has, the incredible YouTube channel. He got his hands on the 14 Pro in Hong Kong through Trinity Electronics, everybody's favorite importer. If you're ever in Hong Kong, you need to go see Trinity. It's a hallelujah moment. You get any phone that all the phones you've ever dreamed of exist there and for you to buy. And so he has a good relationship with them. I think they either he bought it or they let him borrow it for a while. And so we have a hands-on. I'll put the YouTube video in the show notes. Check it out. It's really good. What was really interesting here for me was the amazing camera system, especially the fact that there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, there's a variable aperture from f/1.4 to f/4, which is kind of insane. But that's not the first time we've done variable aperture, but this is a multi-step, I think 1024 step, which is completely overkill, really. Like, you probably only need 2 intermediate steps between those 2 values. Like, if it was going up to f20 or something, I'd say okay. But it's still very impressive because at f/1.4, wow, that's a lot of light. That's a lot of bokeh too, but it's not a 1-inch sensor. I think, and it's apparently not a Sony Litia sensor. It is a somewhat unknown sensor, and it's got some weird funny name like Lightsaber 900 or something. Watch a video, I can't remember right now, but it's hilarious. And we don't know what it is. I think when they finally announce this product officially, we'll find out more. But I am intrigued because I feel like this replacing large 1-inch sensors with slightly smaller, take up less space, make for a thinner Z stack. So now you can maybe add that iris, right, and that space you saved to get the aperture. I think this is great. Like, I'm really looking forward to it. And of course, Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. So it's going to be fun to try out, right?
That's right. And I thought it was interesting that there's not going to be this big wait where usually we get the flagship SoC from Qualcomm and then have to wait around for 6 or 7 weeks until a phone is available. Now we've got one already with the 14 series. And I checked out Ben's video and I saw some of his photos online and kind of picked up on some of the complaints about like low light particularly seemed like it stood out to him in his hands-on, which is interesting because the Gen AI of it all, that's the big upgrade for 8 Gen 3 is the, hexagon NPU,
right?
And then how
and
that kind of ties,
Mm-hmm.
That's right, goes into the other subsystems and what that's going to bring to your camera experience. So it's interesting to me that was the lead of the messaging and that was the first thing that Ben noticed, not maybe being as good as it could be, but again, very early.
Well, also he's comparing it to a masterpiece of a phone, right? The Xiaomi 13 Ultra from last year with 1-inch sensor with variable aperture 2 steps, right? Like it's like comparing like the best phone of imaging from last year with a phone that's not just an Ultra, it's a Pro. It's not supposed to be the best Xiaomi is going to offer. I've got the 13 Pro from last year with the 1-inch sensor, but without the variable aperture, and it's a masterpiece itself. So, and also this is China only. We're going to get a global version of this, but I don't think we're going to see it until December or at the earliest at this point, based on the past. Xiaomi's always pretty much launched within, it feels like days, if not maybe weeks at most, from the Snapdragon new chip announcement every year, right? For the flagship. Actually, for most Snapdragon chips, in fact, like they've always been the first with 7 gens and others too, right? So, and related to that, Vivo is coming out with a phone, the X100 series, or maybe just the regular X100. We're not sure. The X series is their flagship imaging line, just like Xiaomi. There's generally a regular model and a Pro, and sometime a Pro Plus, which would be like equivalent of Ultra for Xiaomi. This is the Vivo X100. So November 13th, set your clocks if you're if you live in a market. I know a lot of my audience is in India and stuff, and in Asia, where you can get the Vivo X series because they're amazing phones. If you can get your hands on one, to try it out, Sean. They're just incredible. I think kind of like I call Vivo the kind of problem child in the BBK group, not because they're problematic per se, but because they kind of have their own mind and they do their own thing. In that sense, they might be a bit of a problem for the BBK group because they're just not beating to the same drum as Oppo, Realme, OnePlus is, but they do some crazy ass good stuff. So I'm excited to see this. I'm also, last year they did the regular as a MediaTek Dimensity phone and then the Pro as a Qualcomm Snapdragon phone. So I want to see what happens because this is very close in timing to the MediaTek Summit. So this could be the announcement of the non-Pro that's a MediaTek phone.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if history repeats itself and that pattern continues with this latest from MediaTek.
For sure. I am, regardless of what they come out with, looking forward to it. Speaking also of imaging, like I'm going through the imaging thing because I want to talk to you about imaging as kind of our final topic. OnePlus 12 rumors to be featuring another or maybe even a new Sony Litia pixel stacked sensor. That's the sensor that I was just mentioning. Instead of a 1-inch, you have like a half size of that. So like 1/1.3 or 1.4, 1.5 inch sensor, takes about half the surface area on the board. But it captures just as much light. We've seen this on OnePlus Open. It seems very effective. Sony, we can trust Sony with their camera sensors. The Litia line is brand new and it seems to be replacing the IMX line at the high end as a stacked technology. And I would be surprised if they're going to pump out some new sensors. And they've traditionally, like for Xiaomi and Vivo and Oppo/OnePlus, have made custom versions of their sensors for these new phones. So we could see a completely new Sony Litia sensor for the OnePlus 12, or we can see a revised version of something even a bit more beefy than what we had on OnePlus Open. In which case, I'm asking you the question, OnePlus 12 doesn't say Pro behind it. Will we see a Pro this year, you think? And if not, how are they going to keep the price in check? Because that's the thing that makes a OnePlus. Other than the lack of wireless charging, the OnePlus 11 5G last year was amazing and price-wise was really competitive.
So will we see the Pro this year? What's the date for the 12? Do we know that yet?
We don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess once there's a date to the 12, it'll be easier to guess if there's going to be a Pro. But
I have a crazy theory, and I want you to tell me how crazy my theory is.
Sure.
You be the judge. My theory is this. We're going to get a OnePlus 12 and a OnePlus 12 Pro this year. And they're going to be completely a match for the Oppo Find X, 7 and X7 Pro, the new flagship from Oppo. What happens is normally Oppo gets the best stuff and then OnePlus kind of gets a bit of a second best. And but now that they're kind of seemingly sharing phones, I don't know if it's going to be reserved to their folding phones, the sharing, but if it's not, it's possible that we get the OnePlus 12 in North America and then Oppo gets the essentially 12 Pro version and the regular 12 for the other markets, or mostly China or maybe India or something. Because that way you can keep the price in check and you can still get a really solid phone. Like if they added wireless charging to the 11 and gave it a slightly better camera and still priced it like $799-ish, it would fly for the OnePlus fans. They don't have carrier relationships anymore except for the Nord series, right, in North America. So I don't think that's coming back. They blew it, right? Like, I'm excited about the OnePlus 12. And related to that, the OnePlus Open gained pen support, which I thought was like interesting because they never mentioned it.
Well,
why not mention it?
I think maybe they got the feedback. They got the feedback from the market. I mean, that's I guess, do most people who have foldables want a pen? I don't know the answer to that.
Why don't you tell it's available?
Yeah.
It's supported. And yes, if there's enough demand, we'll make a pen. Or in this case, you can use the OnePlus Pads pen. So buy the OnePlus Pad pen as an accessory. It's available in the US store. So
yeah, well, first, where do you fall on that when you're using a foldable device?
I don't care. I don't use the pen, but I support people who do, and I want them to have their pen. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I love that the Galaxy Note and the Galaxy S Ultra series have merged, right? Because like, I don't care about the pen, but I understand how so many people came back to the S Ultra series from being Note users, and why shouldn't have their pen with their pen silo. Good for you. Do it.
100%.
I think of the S Ultra series as the kitchen sink of Android phones. Like, I love that about them. There's not a single thing left unturned. They're like, oh, you want that feature? Check. You want that feature? Okay, check. It's like the only thing we're missing on a Samsung Galaxy S Ultra of some kind right now is a headphone jack to just completely give us the complete experience, right? That's never going to happen. But hey. So yeah. Let's talk about AI photography real quick because I'm a little concerned. You wrote a really cool story on LinkedIn about this.
Yeah, I struggle with this. There is a line there, and I just don't know where it is. Maybe for context, before I got into tech journalism, I was just I worked for the Miami Herald Company as just a journalist covering land use and environmental policy, and there's a big emphasis on not just photography, but photography that was of a good quality, but not photography that needed to be post-processed to make it put into a format that you could publish. It was meant to show imperfections, and that's maybe the point, was to show things as they were as accurately as you can. I think there's a whole philosophical debate. Like, once you choose to take a picture, you have chosen, just even by virtue of the composition, you've made some choice. Yes.
I feel like I compose and think about my shots a lot, especially when it's not something like where I have to snap a bunch of kids running around or something. I accept some flaws that I see in the viewfinder. Like, I am also happy that there are some tools that let me remove the ones I don't want in my viewfinder, but I don't have time to stick around and remove. But I start getting iffy about it because I look at photos of me as a kid that my family took, and you remember the Instagram vibe we all got from this imperfection initially. I mean, probably kids these days don't even remember what Instagram was like originally. Like, Instagram was iPhone only. It was only about photos, and it was only square form factor, and it was about the filters, about the experience of taking a Polaroid, basically, with the kind of imperfections of a Polaroid. It was kind of leaning on the fact that phones back then weren't really that great at taking photos. So now, it wasn't perfect, and I'm glad we've evolved past that. Am I happy with Reels and all that? Not really. But the point is, I look at my old photos as a kid, right? And there are people in the background. Imagine if you magic erase all these people out. Then you don't see the outfits from the 90s and the 80s. You don't see the cars. You don't see you don't get that vibe. You don't get that this is what it was like. You don't get that snapshot of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's about, I guess it's about what you want to remember, or maybe even if you take memory out of it, it's about what you want to encapsulate and show. And, to the Gen AI point, God, early days of Instagram, you remember when you got a really good shot from your camera in your phone, you would put hashtag no filter on there because the assumption is that there is a filter, and now we're gonna get to this boring dystopian future. Hashtag it's like
no Gen AI.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
exactly
I took
right.
It out of your mouth.
That's it though, and I just there was some, maybe beyond the scope of the conversation, but some interesting tools baked in to Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 that would show you the provenance of the the metadata of an image. When was it modified by Gen AI? And I think, that's good and that's important that they're doing it, but most people are not going to care about that.
Well, that's why the
all.
Leica camera that you can spend $9,000 on does this at production time, because if you're a photojournalist today, this is going to become a real thing, right? Like, of course, I want to see Canon and Nikon DSLRs do that, but before Nikon and Canon actually even implement this feature, we need them to add USB-C charging to their DSLRs, which the European Union is going to mandate very soon. Otherwise, they won't be able to sell these machines anymore, and we won't have any DSLRs with an actual mechanical shutter. That's a whole different conversation that I read an article about on this week. But you make a good point, and the good point is yes, you can add that authenticity stamp, like, what is it called? There's a name for it.
TruePic.
That's it. There's also another one called open source one called CR.
C2PA.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is, I'm on board with that, but the cameras need to generate that data, because then it becomes useful. And then you have a history of the edits, kind of more or less. And I think that helps, especially for contexts like photojournalism, right? Like when you're reporting about the war that's happening in the Middle East right now, propaganda is going nuts on both sides right now. And it's like, what's real? Like with a Gen AI, what's real? Like, so if you have a photo from AP or from some major news organization that says, we took this, and you can see in the metadata all the history of the edits, right? That's awesome.
That's awesome, and I'm glad it's accessible. And I just hope that as mainstream as Gen AI is going to be, I hope that the understanding of the context of when and how it was used is also concurrently mainstream, because I think that's very important to preserving authenticity, which it's great to deviate from that and to have fun and be creative, but there's it's obviously going to be weaponized. It's already being weaponized. So you gotta have a knowledgeable consumer market, and they have to have access to and the desire to actually get into the metadata and see what is and what is not real. Otherwise,
it needs to be kind of like, when Twitter was still Twitter before it got turned into crap. When it would warn you, it'd say, this, or like YouTube does when you go to like a 9/11 video, right? Or it'd tell you this, like the context, right? I think stuff like that would really help. But I'm also, I'm not against it either because, like, look, oftentimes I've taken a photo 4:3, right? And I need to use it in a video as a thumbnail. And I go, oh man, now I need to crop this photo and the phone doesn't fully fit in the shot because like a product shot I took, right? Because my stories, my writing photos need to be 4:3, but my video stuff so now I need to do 2 sets and I forget or I don't. And then now I can expand. I can go like, take that photo, cropped properly at 4:3, the way I like it, and create some stuff that's blurred in the background, like the rest of the blurry background, that's generic enough that it'll look good as a thumbnail on my YouTube video. That is where Gen AI shines, and I'm not against Gen AI because of it. I'm not even against Magic Eraser. As I said, now some situation I've literally stood there in a public place, waited for the right moment where there was the least amount of people in the shot, just to get that shot. Because Magic Eraser isn't perfect. It leaves like stuff behind. Whereas I think the new stuff is better. So I'm welcoming some of these tools, but at the same time, also, as I said, I'm worried about losing the vibe of the moment. The concept that a photo reflects not just reality, which is important in some contexts, because it's still a creative process. So filtering is okay, but reflects a vibe, a moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're making me think back to maybe some early pixel marketing, and it was something to the effect of like you're not taking a picture, you're capturing a memory, and are memories always perfect? Are they always accurate? Of course not. And I think that's just it's a very interesting conversation, and it's going to, I think, be had in the general public discourse very soon. I certainly hope it happens very soon because it needs to, because the technology is for sale.
Absolutely. We could go on about this for a long time, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Do you want to tell folks, Sean, where they can find you on the internet, where you write, your social media accounts, whatever is relevant that people can find you?
Yeah, check me out on Twitter, on X at Sean Kinney RCR. Follow along RCR. We don't necessarily get deep into the devices, but we get deep into the networks and the technology that make those devices work. And that's why I was really glad to have this conversation with you. I think I spend so much time with cloud companies and infrastructure companies and mobile network operators, and we talk about their KPIs. This is what it looks like when the network is working correctly. This is, my proof point is around my TCO reduction. Okay, that's all fine if that's what you're interested in, but for real people, the device is the proxy for the network. And if you're not having the device experience that you want to have, then the network's not doing what it needs to do, regardless of the KPIs. But if you want to understand that full continuum, check us out, rcrwireless.com.
A great resource to have because, if you're especially, want to keep tabs of what's going on in the industry. I love reading it. And I'll link to your story about the X Elite there. And of course, your LinkedIn story on the photography AI dilemma, as it were. Folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character Tankgirl. Just drop all the vowels. That's my handle on Twitter X / Instagram / Thread / Blue Sky, where I'm mostly prevalent right now. You can also find the podcast at mobiletechpodcast.com or on all the major platforms, YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, etc. Please like the podcast or rate the podcast or write a review, whatever your app lets you do. They would help. And then if you want to see some video content, there's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. I've got the OnePlus Open unboxing. I finally got to edit my video I recorded at the OnePlus event a month ago, even though my review on Hot Hardware was published a while back. So if you want to see me unbox the phone and check it out, high res, go and check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. Also, Instagram, as I said, is a great place for photos. I still use it as a photo place. So check out photos of my devices, my cars that I'm reviewing, and travel photos and food photos and stuff like that. And then you want something extra perhaps, and you want to support me more actively, there's a Patreon, patreon.com/Tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. There's a video version of the podcast you can get ahead of time, like a day or two usually ahead of time, that has extra content. We've gone over time, so I'll probably put some more stuff in there this week. So hopefully you sign up. There is other perks there as well, like access to the Discord server. But if you want a video version, that's definitely what people seem to like the most. And if you join the Patreon, you can get that and help me out, which I would appreciate. If you also want to help me out, just a one-time thing or whatever, you just want to, maybe you don't like Patreon, that's fair. There's a link in the show notes. You can click through it, make a donation with PayPal, and I'd appreciate that as well. On that note, I want to thank our sponsor, Infineon. Infineon Technologies is a global semiconductor leader in power systems and IoT, and on a drive towards decarbonization and digitalization together with its ecosystem partners. In this episode, the company dives into some of the demonstrations highlighted at their signature OktoberTech event in Silicon Valley. And I want to thank you, Sean, for being my guest this week. Thanks so much for coming on and nerding out about all things mobile.
I really enjoyed it, Miriam. I appreciate the invitation. I love the show. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We'll have you on some point in the future again. And folks, we'll have another show next week. So stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.